40 years after a historic blizzard erased a secret listening station from every map, the mountain suddenly breaks its silence. A radio buried under ice crackles to life, repeating a whisper that should have died decades ago. I am still here. From that moment, nothing is normal. The snow melts where it shouldn't. Old lights flicker with no power source, and a forgotten Cold War frequency refuses to fade. Our agent steps into the ruins expecting answers, but the mountain greets him with a voice trapped in time and a truth determined to claw its way back into the world. March arrived quietly over the Wind River Range in Wyoming, the kind of cold that did not simply sting the skin, but seemed to whisper through the bones like an old memory. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with leftover winter, but thin rivers of meltwater ran down the slopes, carving paths through ice that had not moved in decades. As the thaw revealed layers of the mountain's forgotten past, something metallic glinted beneath a ridge of collapsing snow. The long-lost Echo Ridge listening station, sealed under the historic blizzard of 1978 and believed to be destroyed. Now it sat half-exposed, like an artifact pulled from the lungs of the earth, a relic waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to step inside. That someone was Elliot Crane, a CIA field operative known for his sharply tailored suits, his 007-like composure, and his precise, almost feline grace when working missions. Elliot stood 6 feet tall, built lean rather than broad, with black hair kept short and neat despite the wind. His face carried sharp angles, softened only by deep-set gray eyes that usually betrayed nothing. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay a man slightly socially awkward in moments of warmth, a man who could walk into a firefight without blinking, but would lose his words if someone complimented his tie. Elliot was the type whose childhood, marked by a strict military father and a quiet mother who vanished too early, taught him to build walls high and tight. But cracks still existed, mostly in the form of dry humor he tried to hide. He approached the station with the careful steps of a predator entering unfamiliar territory. Steam rose faintly from vents that should have been frozen shut for 40 years. The door, though rusted, opened far too easily, as though whoever had last closed it wanted it to be found. Inside, the air was cold but strangely alive. A coffee mug sat on a metal desk, its contents dried to a ring but the porcelain still faintly warm, as if someone had touched it minutes ago. A desk lamp glowed with a dim amber light, its bulb flickering with a stubbornness that defied logic, given the building's power should have died decades earlier. But what rooted Elliot in place was the soft hum from the far wall, the old Cold War radio transmitter, its panel lights blinking with eerie steadiness. Elliot approached it slowly, the static curled like breath in the frozen air. Then the message came, a whisper worn thin by time but unmistakably human. A man murmuring in Russian, "Ya vise yeshos des." I am still here. The voice looped with mechanical consistency, but there was something organic about it, something that made Elliot's heartbeat shift a fraction faster, a frequency that refused to die. He reached for his recorder when footsteps crunched behind him. "Agent Crane?" The voice belonged to Dr. Hannah Brooks, a climatologist assigned to support the investigation. She stepped into the doorway, brushing melting snow from her parka hood. Hannah was in her early 30s, average height, with soft auburn hair escaping from a messy braid that suggested she valued practicality over vanity. Her skin was pale from long hours indoors analyzing storm patterns, but her cheeks flushed easily in the cold, giving her a gentle, almost warm glow. Hannah had warm brown eyes that seemed to smile before her mouth did, and a personality equal parts curiosity and resilience. She carried herself with a natural softness, yet anyone who knew her understood she wasn't easily broken. Her determination was forged years earlier when she survived a mountain accident during graduate fieldwork, a trauma that shaped her into someone who listened to storms the way others listened to symphonies. Elliot, typically impenetrable, found himself unexpectedly off balance whenever her gaze lingered too long. He nodded toward the transmitter, trying and failing to disguise the momentary awkwardness. "The station has been transmitting for 40 years, he said, and someone wanted us to hear it." Hannah stepped closer, her boots thumping softly on the metal floor. "This place shouldn't even exist anymore," she murmured. "The snowpack reports from 1980 say the building collapsed." "Reports were wrong," Elliot replied, though his tone carried more wonder than correction. Hannah leaned in to observe the equipment, her breath forming small clouds. Elliot caught himself studying the way she worried her lower lip while analyzing data, an unconscious habit that somehow made his chest tighten just slightly. "Do we know whose voice that is?" she asked. "Not yet," Elliot said, "but he's been repeating the same sentence since 1978. Hannah shivered, though Elliot couldn't tell if it was the cold or the haunting persistence of the message. She glanced around the eerily preserved room. "It's like the mountain froze time on purpose." Elliot almost smiled. Mountains have good taste. The joke slipped out before he could stop it. Hannah gave a short laugh, the kind of bright, genuine sound that made Elliot's suit feel too tight. He looked away, pretending to inspect the wiring just to hide the warmth creeping into his ears. But the whispering frequency continued, looping through the frozen heart of the station like a ghost that refused to surrender its truth. And Elliot Crane knew, with the cold certainty of a storm forming on the horizon, that this was only the beginning. Morning settled over the Wind River Range like pale silk, thin and cold, spreading across slopes that glittered under a reluctant sun. Elliot Crane stood outside the Echo Ridge listening station, the air sharp enough to bite. Overnight winds had carved patterns in the snow like talons raking across the mountain, but the morning calm felt deceptive, a quiet that always made Elliot more alert, more aware of the weight of unanswered questions. Behind him, the station door creaked faintly in the breeze, as though the building itself remembered something it was reluctant to share. Inside, he headed for the back corridor, a place he'd noted yesterday but hadn't had time to investigate thoroughly. The metal walls were lined with frost, and faint crystallized patterns resembled hands pressed against glass long ago. At the end of the hallway, a steel panel jutted slightly from the wall. Not loose, not damaged, just deliberately out of place. Elliot ran his gloved fingers along its edges, feeling the cold seep through even the insulated material. A slight indentation at the bottom indicated someone once used a tool to pry it open. He braced his boots and pulled. The panel groaned, scraping ice from its hinges, and revealed a narrow door behind it. A hidden chamber. Elliot switched on his handheld light and stepped inside. The room was small, barely large enough for two adults to stand shoulder to shoulder. Dust clung to every surface, but not the kind that accumulated naturally, more like the fine residue of snowmelt and old batteries. In the center, a reel-to-reel recorder sat on a steel table, its magnetic tape cut abruptly near the end, as though someone had sliced it in panic or desperation. Elliot leaned down and hit play. Static filled the space for several seconds. Then suddenly, a sharp rhythmic sequence broke through. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. The old CIA distress code. Unmistakable. Elliot's breath slowed. "Someone tried to signal Langley," he murmured, but didn't finish the message. He scanned the walls. In the far corner he spotted a metal locker, dented but intact. Inside, he found a stack of old personnel folders sealed in plastic. Dates ranging from 1975 to 1978. Names of analysts, cryptologists, technicians. He flipped through until one name caught his eye. Samuel Grayson, nickname in parenthesis, Crow, former communications specialist, known for a sharp wit, a calm temperament, and an uncanny ability to predict Soviet signal patterns. a man described by colleagues as silent but fiercely loyal, someone who grew up in Montana's harsh winters and survived a childhood avalanche that killed 2 cousins, an event that gave him a lifelong fear of deep snow, but also drove him into intelligence work, where he believed knowledge could prevent tragedies. According to the report, Samuel Grayson had been declared dead on January 31, 1978, claimed by the blizzard that buried the IB station. And yet somehow the station still whispered. Elliot closed the folder slowly. "Crow," he said under his breath. "Did you really die here?" Footsteps approached. Hannah Brooks appeared in the doorway, bundled in her parka, cheeks pink from the cold. Her auburn hair peeked out from under a wool cap, and she carried a small tablet filled with topographic models. She had the kind of calm presence that made storms seem less threatening. Ironic, Elliot always thought, since she spent her life studying them. Today, her curiosity seemed sharpened. "Found something?" she asked. Elliot handed her the folder. "More than something." Hannah scanned the document, her brows knitting. "He was alone when the station went dark?" "Looks like it," Elliot said, "or at least the only one who didn't make it out." Hannah bit her lip, that same habit that made Elliot lose half his vocabulary. "So the voice on the transmitter? Is it him?" "If it is, he's had a very long conversation with the snow." Hannah let out a quiet, startled laugh. Elliot hesitated, then turned away, hoping she didn't notice the flush in his ears. "Come on," she said, tapping the tablet. "I want to show you something outside. The ridge behind the station is unstable after last night's wind." They geared up and headed uphill. The climb wasn't long, but the slope was steep and slick, with freshly exposed ice. Hannah walked confidently at first, her steps practiced from years of mountain fieldwork. But as they ascended, the wind shifted, sweeping loose powder across the ridge. Her boots slipped on a transparent sheet of ice hidden beneath the snow. "Careful!" Elliot grabbed her arm just as she pitched forward. His grip steadied her, his fingers closing around her parka sleeve with swift precision. For a moment, time felt suspended between them, the only movement the swirl of white around their feet. Hannah let out an embarrassed exhale. "That was not my most graceful moment." Elliot smirked despite himself. "Please don't fall. I really don't want to write a 20-page incident report." She laughed, a bright ringing sound that echoed across the ridge. Elliot's cheeks warmed instantly, betraying him once more. 10 years in the CIA, countless covert operations, and nothing flustered him, except apparently one storm scientist with an easy laugh. When they reached the top of the ridge, Hannah pointed out deep fissures in the ice structure behind the station. The storm in 1978 may have triggered a collapse that hid the building completely, the snowpacks finally thinning enough to reveal it again. Elliot nodded, his mind still anchored to the hidden chamber, the cut tape, the distress knock, and the name Samuel Grayson, Crow, circling like a phantom through the frigid air. As they stood overlooking the white expanse, the whisper from the station drifted again through Elliot's memory. "I am still here." And he wondered, with a chill colder than the wind, if a ghost was trying to tell him the truth. The afternoon light over the Wind River Range dimmed into a muted gold, the kind that softened the world but sharpened every instinct Elliot Crane possessed. The winds had calmed to thin, sweeping strokes across the peaks, brushing loose frost off the ridgeline like powdered glass. Below them, the Echo Ridge listening station crouched in its half-exhumed shell, metal walls shivering under the weight of memory. After their climb, Elliot and Hannah descended the slope and stepped back inside, their breath mixing with the faint mechanical hum that never seemed to die. The station's interior felt different now, as though the building had grown aware of their discoveries. Elliot walked through the corridor where he had found the hidden chamber earlier that morning. The steel panel still hung open like a skeletal mouth. Hannah followed behind him silently, her boots thudding softly on the metal floor. She had removed her gloves, revealing long, slender fingers reddened by cold. She flexed them instinctively as she scanned the room for anything they had missed. Elliot moved further down the hallway, toward the storage area he had bypassed yesterday. The door was half ajar, a thin line of frost tracing its outline. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was almost perfectly square, with shelves on two sides and a heavy steel workbench in the center. Dust lay thick over everything, except for one object on the bench where a clean rectangle suggested something had recently been removed. A soft noise escaped Hannah. "Elliot, look!" Pinned beneath a rusted wrench was a map, or rather, half of one. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the ink remained surprisingly clear. Cold War markings, coordinates, contour lines, and hand-scribbled notes in pencil. The torn edge was jagged, ripped by force rather than time. Elliot lifted it carefully. His eyes traced the markings toward a circle at the far edge, labeled in faint, uneven handwriting. Glacier Hollow. Hannah stepped closer. "I've heard that name." Her voice held an edge of awe. "The Shoshone tribes talk about it, a place where storms are born, where winter hides things it refuses to return." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Sounds comforting." "Most legends aren't," she answered with a small smile. Bending over the map, Elliot saw that the path to Glacier Hollow seemed deliberate, charted with precision and caution. Someone from this station had studied it, someone who perhaps had gone there. He turned the map over. A faint smear of something, maybe old charcoal or ice residue, covered the back. And above the workbench on the steel wall, nearly invisible under frost, were scratched words so faint Elliot almost missed them. "If I freeze, truth lives." He scraped a finger across the letters, removing a thin sheet of ice. The words sharpened. Hannah's breath hitched. "That wasn't random," she whispered. "Someone wanted those words found." "And someone wanted that map torn," Elliot said. "Half a secret is sometimes more dangerous than all of it." A sudden series of barks echoed through the hallway. Deep, booming, followed by an excited howl. Elliot tensed until Hannah smiled knowingly. "Don't worry, that's mine." She turned toward the doorway. "Ranger?" The dog trotted into the room, a large, elderly Alaska Malamute, about 11 years old. His thick coat was white, streaked with gray, the kind that looked like a storm cloud had pressed its paws onto his fur. His eyes were pale brown, softened by age, but still bright with instinct. He walked with a gentle limp in his back right leg, likely from old mountain injuries, yet his tail wagged with a wide sweep that made the dust on the floor swirl. Ranger approached Elliot, sniffed his boots, then looked up as if evaluating him. Elliot knelt to let the dog sniff his glove. Ranger gave a single approving huff and turned immediately toward the back exit of the station. "Where's he going?" Elliot asked. Hannah frowned. "He's been doing that since we got here, barking toward the East Ridge." The same direction marked on the map, the same direction that led to Glacier Hollow. Ranger barked again, a sharp, urgent sound, then looked over his shoulder as though expecting them to follow. Elliot exchanged a glance with Hannah. "Your dog knows something." "He's old, but he's never wrong about snowpaths," she said softly. "He's led me out of 2 whiteout events, saved my life once." Her voice carried a deeper note there, a memory she didn't elaborate on but didn't need to. Ranger paced impatiently, tail stiff and ears alert. Elliot folded the half map and tucked it carefully into his inner coat pocket. "We'll follow him," he said. "But not yet. We need daylight." Hannah nodded. "And supplies." "Supplies," Elliot repeated. "Right, because I assume Glacier Hollow isn't known for its luxurious amenities." She laughed, the sound warm against the cold metal walls. "Depends how you feel about dying of exposure." Ranger barked again, a single, low, resolute note. Hannah scratched behind his ears. "Patience, old man. We hear you." As they turned to leave the room, the transmitter in the main chamber crackled, filling the corridor with static before the familiar whisper slid through the silence. "I am still here." Hannah shivered. Elliot paused, eyes narrowing. The torn map, the scratched warning, the dog pointing toward a legend, and a voice that refused to fade. The mountain wasn't finished speaking. The morning after their discovery of the torn map arrived with a sky the color of cold steel. Thick clouds rolled low over the Wind River Range, hinting at a storm forming beyond the peaks. Elliot Crane zipped up his insulated jacket and glanced toward the eastern ridge where Ranger stood alert, tail stiff, paws planted in the snow as though guarding a secret entrance the mountain had hidden for decades. Hannah Brooks checked her gear beside him, brushing frost from her glasses, strands of auburn hair escaping her hood. Her usual warmth was tempered by concern today. She could smell a storm coming the way musicians sense a wrong note long before it sounds. "Wind's shifting southeast," she murmured. "We may have only a few hours before it hits." Elliot nodded. "Then we'll make every minute count." They followed Ranger as he pushed through drifts with surprising strength for an aging dog. The path sloped downward toward a narrow gorge that Hannah had explained was shaped by centuries of glacial runoff. The terrain grew sharper, more jagged, an icy labyrinth carved by time itself. Elliot navigated each step with caution, relying on instinct sharpened over years in the field. As they approached the mouth of Glacier Hollow, the air changed. Suddenly still, unnaturally silent, as though the world had taken a collective breath and refused to release it. The entrance was a massive arch of translucent ice, shimmering with trapped air bubbles, like constellations, frozen in mid-motion. Ranger barked once, the sound soft but urgent, then squeezed through a narrow crevice carved between slabs of ancient frost. Inside, the hollow widened into a cavern bathed in a pale blue glow. The ice walls reflected light in shifting patterns, giving the illusion of movement, like silhouettes just out of sight. Elliot's flashlight beam scanned the cavern until it landed on a metal hatch embedded in the floor, half buried beneath decades of snow and ice. Rust surrounded its edges, but the handle was polished smooth, as though someone had touched it again and again with desperate hands. Elliot knelt. "Help me clear it." Together, he and Hannah scraped away layers of compacted snow. Ranger paced anxiously beside them, whining low in his throat. The hatch finally groaned open, exhaling a rush of stale, cold air. A metal ladder descended into darkness. Elliot went first. The chamber below was small, barely the size of a storage room, but unmistakably designed as a survival pod from the 1970s. Reinforced walls, a faded emergency supply kit, oxygen tanks long depleted. But in the corner, half covered by blankets stiffened with frost, lay a man. Elliot froze. The man's hair, once dark, had faded into a wild mane of silver. His beard was long, tangled, and frostbitten in patches. His face, pale, deeply lined, bore the marks of a lifetime trapped in winter. His clothes were unmistakable, an old radio operator uniform from the Cold War. Era, the insignia worn, but visible. He looked like a ghost until his eyelids flickered. Hannah gasped softly. "He's alive!" Elliot knelt beside the man, removing his glove and pressing 2 fingers gently against the man's neck. A pulse, faint, trembling but present, pulsed against his fingertips. The old man's lips parted, forming barely audible sounds. Don't let them erase?" A pause, a shuddering inhale. The frequency. The words drifted across the chamber like snowflakes dissolving on warm skin. Elliot felt a chill deeper than the cold around them. "Samuel Grayson," he whispered. Crow. Hannah's eyes widened. She had read the file. She knew the dates. Samuel Grayson should have been dead for 40 years. Ranger suddenly moved closer, lowering his massive body beside the old man and curling tightly into a protective arc. The elderly Malamute pressed his thick fur against Samuel's side, sharing warmth instinctively. Hannah knelt and added her gloves and scarf to cover the man's chest. She moved carefully with the same delicate precision of someone tending to a dying bird. "His body temperature is dangerously low," she said. "If we don't keep him warm, he won't survive until extraction." Above them, a roar echoed through the ice, the kind of guttural thunder that only blizzards produced. Hannah looked toward the hatch. "That storm is already here." Elliot tightened Samuel's blankets. "We ride it out here." The wind howled fiercely through the cavern entrance, rattling the walls of the survival pod. Frost flakes swirled in erratic patterns, and the temperature dropped by the minute. Hannah positioned herself on Samuel's other side, sharing what warmth she could. Elliot removed his insulated outer jacket and draped it over them. Then he sat near the hatch, rifle by his knee, every muscle thrumming at the thought of how close they had come to leaving this man undiscovered. Samuel stirred faintly. His eyes cracked open, blue, clouded, but conscious for a moment. They focused on Elliot with surprising clarity. "They tried to bury me." His voice shook like a broken wire. "But the truth doesn't die." Snow slammed into the walls above, shaking loose small fragments of ice. Ranger pressed closer against Samuel, whining softly as if urging him to stay awake. Hannah leaned close to Elliot. If he made it 40 years in this cold, he held on to something stronger than fear. Elliot nodded. Or someone really didn't want him found. The blizzard screamed across Glacier Hollow, but inside the tiny survival pod, 3 living hearts beat, fragile, stubborn, refusing to stop. Samuel Grayson had survived the mountain, and now he had been found. The storm passed in the early hours before dawn, leaving Glacier Hollow shrouded in a brittle silence. Ice crystals drifted in veils of soft light that filtered through the cavern entrance as Elliot Crane climbed the ladder out of the survival pod. The world outside glowed in hues of blue and gold as though the storm had polished the mountain into glass. He inhaled the frigid air, the cold biting his lungs with a sharpness that reminded him he was still alive, and that Samuel Grayson impossibly was too. Hannah Brooks followed him up, brushing snow off her sleeves. Her auburn hair clung in damp curls around her cheeks, and exhaustion softened her normally alert features. Yet her eyes glowed with a mixture of relief and awe. Ranger climbed last, shaking frost from his thick coat and stretching his stiff legs before padding back toward the pod entrance, unwilling to leave Samuel unattended for long. Elliot descended again to check on Samuel. The old man had regained partial consciousness, though his breath was still shallow, and every exhale trembled through the thin blankets they had wrapped around him. His face, framed by silver hair and an unkempt beard, bore the ashen tint of someone who had bargained with death too many times, but his eyes, icy blue beneath heavy lids, still held fire. Hannah knelt beside him. "He's warmer now," she murmured. "But we need to get him down the mountain before his body gives up." Samuel's lips twitched, forming fragments of words. Elliot leaned closer until he could hear the faint rasp. "Don't let them rewrite the story?" "We won't," Elliot promised. "But we need the whole truth. Tell us everything you remember." Samuel closed his eyes briefly, gathering what strength he had left. When he spoke again, his voice was a brittle whisper, yet steady, the sound of a memory he had repeated to himself for 40 years so it wouldn't die with him. 1978, Samuel began. "I discovered a frequency, Soviet, inconsistencies, someone on my team, feeding information out. His thin hand trembled, fingers curling weakly around Elliot's wrist. He was American. We trusted him. He turned. Hannah swallowed, her breath catching. A double agent? Samuel nodded slowly. The snowstorm hit. Visibility gone. I tried to warn Langley. He caught me, locked the station. His next breaths came ragged. He left with the others. Told them, I died in the whiteout. Left me. Here. Elliot felt anger coil deep in his chest, not the hot, reckless kind, but a cold and controlled wrath, the type that sharpened his judgment rather than clouded it. You survived using this pod? Elliot asked. Samuel's gaze shifted toward the faded 1970s survival equipment. Canned rations long expired, oxygen tanks empty, blankets stiff with frost. For a time, yes, then I used the transmitter, kept the frequency alive. Every day, 40 winters. His voice, cracked. Didn't know if anyone would ever hear. Ranger inched closer, lowering his heavy head onto Samuel's arm. Samuel let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. Good dog. Elliot exchanged a glance with Hannah. A silent agreement formed between them. They would get this man to safety, no matter the cost. With the storm eased and daylight beginning to stretch across the canyon, Elliot and Hannah prepared Samuel for transport. They fashioned a makeshift sled from the survival pod's metal panel and wrapped him in every insulated layer they had. Ranger trotted beside them as they began their slow descent, the dog sniffing the snow ahead and alerting them to unstable patches. The climb down was punishing, each step careful and deliberate over the uneven terrain. The wind sliced at their faces, and the weight of Samuel's body tested Elliot's endurance. Yet the image of the torn map, the hidden chamber, the endless whispering frequency, and the old man's unwavering will pushed him forward. By the time they reached the base ridge, emergency responders, alerted by Elliot's earlier signal, were waiting. Among them was Agent Mark Duvall, a tall man in his mid-40s with sandy hair, heavy-set shoulders, and a stern but composed demeanor. He was known in the agency for his reliability and fierce loyalty, a man shaped by losing his brother in an overseas operation years earlier, a grief that turned him into someone who refused to leave anyone behind again. Duvall's eyes widened when he saw Samuel. My God, that's impossible. Not impossible, Elliot said. Just forgotten. Samuel was transported to a medical tent, and as medics worked over him, Elliot watched with an unshakable sense that one more piece of Cold War history had clawed its way back to the present. Hours later, after Samuel was stabilized and flown to a secure facility, Elliot and Hannah stood at the edge of the clearing where the snow had begun to melt under the early spring sun. The harshness of winter was slipping away, replaced with a gentler light that warmed even the frozen earth beneath their boots. Hannah quietly slipped her hand into Elliot's. The gesture startled him in a soft, human way, more deeply than any mission report ever had. Sometimes, she said, voice barely louder than the breeze, even frozen places find their spring. For a moment, Elliot simply looked at her, the woman who had laughed at his dry jokes on icy cliffs, who had kept an old man alive through a storm, who had reminded him that he was more than the missions that defined him. He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. And sometimes even secret agents need someone to keep them warm. Ranger barked once, as if approving the sentiment, his tail wagging in a slow, tired sweep. Samuel Grayson had survived. The truth had been unearthed. And as Elliot stood there with Hannah's hand in his, for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar but welcome thaw inside him. The beginning of a new journey, not just as an agent of the CIA, but as a man rediscovering his own heart.